The observation deck of the research vessel Horizon was silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the gentle tapping of Alice's stylus against her tablet. Her eyes hadn't left the viewport for the past 3 hours. Outside, streams of blue-white light danced through the darkness of space, moving in patterns that seemed both random and purposeful at the same time. Log entry 47, day 89, she whispered into her recorder. The Luminars continue to display behavior that challenges our understanding of physics. Their energy signatures suggest consciousness, but their movements... She paused, watching as one of the light beings twisted itself into an impossible shape. Their movements suggest curiosity. The Horizon had been following this cluster of Luminars for the past 3 months. As the ship's lead xenobiologist, Alice had spent countless hours observing them. Most of her colleagues had grown bored with watching the light shows, but not her. She saw something in their patterns, something more than just random energy discharges. A knock on the deck's door broke her concentration. "Dr. Ward." Captain Miller's voice carried through the metal. "The evening briefing starts in 5 minutes." "Just a moment," she called back, quickly saving her notes. But as she stood to leave, something caught her eye. One of the Luminars had broken away from its group and was approaching the viewport. Alice held her breath. This was closer than any of them had ever come to the ship. The being's light pulsed softly, changing from blue to a warm golden color. As she watched, it began to move in a way that made her heart skip a beat. It was mimicking the motion of her earlier note-taking, its energy form swaying back and forth like a pendulum. "Dr. Ward," the captain called again. "You need to see this," she said, not taking her eyes off the viewport. She heard the door slide open, and the captain's footsteps approaching. The Luminar responded to the new presence by shifting its color again, this time to a deep purple. It moved closer still, nearly touching the reinforced glass of the viewport. The ship's proximity alerts remained silent. The special shielding they'd installed was doing its job, protecting their electronics from the being's energy field. "This is unprecedented," Captain Miller whispered, all thoughts of the briefing forgotten. "It's never approached this close before." Alice nodded, slowly raising her hand toward the viewport. The Luminar's glow intensified, and to their amazement, it moved to align with her hand on the other side of the glass. For a brief moment, only a few inches of reinforced viewport separated human tissue from pure energy. "Careful, Doctor," Miller warned. "We don't know enough about their capabilities." "Look at its behavior," Alice said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's not just mimicking. It's trying to understand. All these months, we've been studying them, but they've been studying us too." The Luminar pulled back slightly, its color shifting through a rainbow of hues before settling back to its original blue-white. It moved in what almost looked like a nod, then rejoined its cluster. Alice quickly grabbed her tablet, fingers flying over the surface as she recorded every detail of the interaction. "This changes everything, Captain. They're not just conscious. They're actively seeking contact. We need to adjust our research protocols. If we could find a way to communicate." Miller held up his hand. "One step at a time, Doctor. We'll discuss this at the briefing." "But..." He paused, looking out at the cluster of Luminars. "I agree this changes things. Send your preliminary report to the science team. We'll need to inform Earth Command about this development." As they left the observation deck, Alice cast one last look over her shoulder. The Luminar that had approached was still visible among its peers, its glow slightly different from the others. She couldn't prove it, but somehow she knew it would return. In the darkness of space, watched by curious human eyes, the dance of the Luminars continued. But now, for the first time since humanity had discovered these beings, the dance had gained new meaning. The steps were no longer random. They were the beginning of a conversation that would change everything. The emergency meeting of the Horizon senior staff didn't go as Alice had hoped. She stood before the gathered officers in the ship's main conference room, her recorded footage of the Luminar interaction playing on the large screen behind her. With all due respect, Dr. Ward, Chief Security Officer Robert Parker said, his arms crossed, what you're suggesting goes against every first contact protocol we have. Alice took a deep breath. The protocols were written before we understood what the Luminars were capable of. They're not just energy masses. They're intelligent beings trying to communicate. Intelligent beings that could fry every system on this ship with a single touch, Engineer Mike Thompson added. He tapped his tablet, bringing up charts of energy readings. Each one of them puts out enough power to run a small city. One wrong move and... But they haven't. Alice interrupted. They've been near our ship for months. If they wanted to harm us, they could have done it already. Captain Miller raised his hand for silence. The room quieted immediately. Dr. Ward's observation is valid, he said carefully. But so are the safety concerns. We'll send the data to Earth Command and wait for their response. Later that night, Alice couldn't sleep. She made her way back to the observation deck, not surprised to find her Luminar. As she'd started thinking of it, waiting there, over the past week, it had returned each night, copying her movements with increasing accuracy. I know you can understand me, she whispered, pressing her hand against the viewport. We just need to find a way to prove it to the others. The Luminar brightened, its color shifting to the same golden hue as before. It moved closer, performing a complex series of twists that Alice had learned meant it was excited. She grabbed her tablet and started recording. Let's try something new, she said, pulling up a simple mathematics program. She drew a large number 2 on the screen, held it up, then drew 2 circles beside it. The Luminar watched intently. Heart pounding. Alice drew the number 3, then waited. The Luminar pulsed 3 times, perfectly spaced. She drew 4, and it responded with 4 pulses. Her hand shook as she recorded the interaction. This is amazing, she whispered. You really do understand. A warning light flashed on the wall. The ship's automated reminder that the observation deck would soon begin its decontamination cycle. Alice quickly saved her recording. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something odd. The Luminar was making a new pattern, one she'd never seen before. It moved in a way that seemed urgent. Against every protocol, every rule she'd learned, Alice stayed. The decontamination warning blinked faster. What are you trying to tell me? She asked, checking the time. She had 3 minutes before the system would lock down. The Luminar's movements became more complex. It created shapes that reminded Alice of the ship's engine diagrams. Then it changed color to a deep red, the same shade as the warning light. Alice's eyes widened as understanding hit her. You're warning us about something. The final warning sounded. She had to leave now or be locked in for the full decontamination cycle. But the Luminar's message seemed desperately important, making a decision that would change everything. Alice pulled out her emergency override key. As the ship's lead scientist, she had the authority to delay decontamination for critical research. Show me, she said, entering her code. What's wrong with our engines? Outside in the darkness of space, the other Luminars gathered closer, their light dimming as if holding their breath. Inside the observation deck, a human and an energy being began to break down the barriers between their species, one forbidden interaction at a time. Neither of them knew that this breach of protocol would soon save not just the horizon, but change the course of human history forever. The warning sirens blared through the horizon's corridors at 300 hours. Alice jerked awake in her quarters, her heart racing as the ship's AI made the announcement. Critical engine failure imminent. All hands to emergency stations. She rushed to the bridge, still pulling on her uniform jacket. Captain Miller was already there, his face lit by the red glow of warning lights. The cooling system is failing, Engineer Thompson reported, his fingers flying over the control panel. Temperature in the engine core is rising fast. We have maybe 30 minutes before total shutdown. What happens then? Miller asked, though they all knew the answer. We'll lose life support. Out here, that means Thompson didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Alice stepped forward. Captain, the Luminar was trying to warn us about this. Let me do an external inspection. Maybe I can spot what's wrong. Miller shook his head. Too dangerous. The radiation levels will kill us anyway if we don't fix this. Alice finished. The suits can handle 20 minutes of exposure. That's enough time. After a tense moment, Miller nodded. Do it. But at the first sign of trouble, you come back in. That's an order. 5 minutes later, Alice floated outside the massive ship, her magnetic boots keeping her anchored to the hull. The engine section loomed ahead, its usual blue glow now an angry red. Her suit's Geiger counter clicked faster as she approached. Reading you clear, Dr. Ward. Thompson's voice crackled in her helmet. 15 minutes of safe exposure remaining. Alice moved carefully along the hull, scanning each section. The Luminars kept their distance, their light dimmed as if in respect of the danger. All except one. Her Luminar approached slowly, its glow shifting to match the warning red of the engine. I understand now, Alice said, though only the crew could hear her through the radio. You were trying to tell us about this. The beam pulsed once. The signal they had established meant yes. She reached the main cooling valve and found the problem. There's a micrometeorite impact here, she reported. It's damaged the primary coolant line. We need tow. Her words cut off as her suit's systems suddenly flickered. The meteorite had weakened this section of the hull, and the engine's radiation was stronger than they'd thought. Her heads-up display went dark. Dr. Ward. Alice, do you copy? Captain Miller's voice faded to static. Alice tried to move, but her suit's systems were dead. Without power to the magnetic boots, she began to drift away from the ship. The temperature inside her suit started to rise as the cooling system failed. Copy. Anyone. She tried, but her radio was gone. Through her faceplate, she watched the horizon grow smaller. The other Luminars scattered in apparent panic, their lights flashing in distress. But one stayed. Her Luminar moved closer, its light changing to a soft, calming blue. Alice's scientific mind noted absently that it seemed to be considering something, making a decision that went against its very nature. Then it did the impossible. The Luminar reached out, a tendril of pure energy extending toward her drifting form. Everything Alice knew about physics told her this was the end. Energy beings couldn't touch physical matter without destroying it. Her last thought was a hope that her data would help others understand these remarkable creatures. The tendril of light touched her suit's glove, and nothing exploded, nothing burned. Instead, her suit's systems blazed back to life, stronger than before. But that wasn't what made Alice gasp in wonder. As the Luminar maintained its contact, her mind filled with images, emotions, and ideas that weren't her own. For the first time in human history, two entirely different forms of life made direct contact. And in that moment, both species understood that everything they thought they knew about the universe was about to change. The medical bay of the horizon was silent except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Alice lay on the examination table, her eyes closed but her mind more active than ever before. Dr. Bill Peters waved his scanner over her for the 10th time in an hour. I still can't explain it, he said to Captain Miller, who hadn't left the medical bay since they brought Alice back aboard. Her brain activity is off the charts, but there's no sign of radiation damage. It's like her neural pathways have been upgraded. Alice opened her eyes. They've been waiting for thousands of years, she said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. The Luminars. They've watched countless civilizations rise and fall, always wanting to make contact, but afraid their touch would destroy organic life. Through the medical bay's viewport, her Luminar hovered, its glow now a gentle green that she somehow knew meant concern. The neural connection they shared was unlike anything humans had ever experienced. You can communicate with it? Miller asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. Alice nodded. Not with words. It's more like sharing thoughts and memories. They're a collective consciousness, Captain. Each luminar is an individual, but they share a connection to their entire species' knowledge. Dr. Peters checked his readings again. The energy beam's contact seems to have created some kind of biomural interface in your brain. It's not harmful. If anything, your neural efficiency has increased by 200%. They were scientists, too. Alice continued, her eyes distant as she processed the flood of new information. They evolved from organic beings like us, but over millions of years, they found a way to transform their consciousness into pure energy. They thought they'd lost the ability to connect with physical life forms forever. The luminar pulsed, sending a wave of emotions through their connection. Alice smiled. Until they found us. They saw something in humans that they hadn't seen in other species, an ability to adapt, to embrace the unknown. Captain Miller leaned forward. What about the engine problem? Did they know it was going to fail? Yes. Alice sat up slowly, Dr. Peters hovering nearby with his scanner. They detected the damage days ago. My luminar tried to warn us using mathematical signals, but when that wasn't enough, it took the risk of direct contact. They have incredible knowledge about energy and physics that they want to share with us. Through the viewport, other luminars began to gather, their lights creating a beautiful aurora of colors. Alice felt their collective curiosity and hope through her connection. There's something else, she said, her voice filled with wonder. The touch that saved me. It wasn't just about fixing my suit. They've been evolving too, trying to find a way to safely interact with physical matter. My curiosity, my willingness to trust despite the risk. It completed something they've been working toward for millennia. Dr. Peters showed his tablet to Captain Miller. Look at these readings, the energy patterns in her brain. If we could replicate this safely. We can. Alice interrupted. They want to teach us. This connection I have, it can be created for others too, with the right preparation. They're offering us technology that could revolutionize everything from space travel to medical science. The luminar pulsed again, and Alice laughed, a sound of pure joy that made both men stare. What is it? Miller asked. They have a sense of humor, she explained. They're saying that for beings who still use rockets to move through space, we're surprisingly quick learners. Outside the viewport, the gathered luminars began a synchronized dance of light and color, a celebration of a barrier finally broken, of two species finding a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. Inside the medical bay, Alice watched with tears in her eyes, feeling the joy of an entire civilization through her newfound connection. The universe, they were all beginning to understand, was about to become a much more interesting place. 2 weeks after first contact, the Horizon's observation deck had been transformed into an impromptu embassy. Screens lined the walls, showing the faces of officials from Earth's United Space Council, while luminars floated outside the viewport in formation, their lights creating patterns that Alice now recognized as their equivalent of formal dress. Let me be clear, Admiral Wilson said from the main screen, his voice thick with disbelief. You're saying these beings can teach us how to convert matter into energy and back again, safely. That's just the beginning. Alice replied, standing tall despite her exhaustion. She hadn't slept much since the connection formed. There was too much to learn, too much to share. They can show us how to create stable wormholes, how to shield our ships from radiation, how do we know this isn't some kind of trap? Interrupted General Adams, his face red on another screen. For all we know, these aliens have hijacked Dr. Ward's mind. The luminars outside pulsed with colors that Alice felt as amusement and patience. Her own luminar, which the crew had started calling Pioneer, moved closer to the viewport. I've undergone every medical test we have, Alice said calmly. The neural connection doesn't control me. It's more like having access to the largest library ever created, but with emotions and memories attached to the knowledge. Captain Miller stepped forward. I can vouch for Dr. Ward's state of mind. In the past 2 weeks, The Luminars have already helped us upgrade our engine efficiency by 300%. They literally showed us how to rewrite the laws of physics as we understand them. On the screens, the council members whispered among themselves. Finally, Dr. Emily Ross, the head of Earth's Science Division, spoke up. "The potential benefits are too great to ignore," she said, "but we need to proceed carefully." "Dr. Ward, can this neural connection be replicated?" Alice nodded. "The Luminars have already helped us design a safe protocol. They suggest starting with a small group of scientists and diplomats. The process requires both physical and mental preparation. But suddenly, all the screens went dark. The ship's lights flickered, and a new alarm started blaring. "Captain," Engineer Thompson's voice came over the intercom. "We've got an unauthorized access attempt in the computer core. Someone's trying to download all our data on the Luminars." The Luminars outside the viewport flared bright red. Through their connection, Alice felt their concern and their determination to help. "It's coming from a stealth ship hiding in our sensor shadow," Thompson continued. "Military-grade encryption, but I don't recognize." "I do," General Adams said grimly, his screen coming back online. "It's one of ours, a Black Ops team that went rogue last month. They must have followed the horizon when we leaked news of first contact." Pioneer pressed close to the viewport, its light steady. Alice felt its message clearly. They could stop the hack, but it would mean revealing more of their capabilities than they had planned. "Do it," she said aloud, and Captain Miller nodded his agreement. The Luminars outside began to spin in a complex pattern. Suddenly, every electronic device on the ship glowed with a soft blue light. In engineering, Thompson let out a surprised laugh. "Whatever they just did," he reported, "it didn't just stop the hack. They've upgraded our entire computer system. Processing power is off the charts, and the quantum encryption they've added, it's beyond anything we've ever seen." On the screens, the council members watched in amazement as data streamed across their displays, showing the extent of the Luminars' gift. "They're not just sharing technology," Alice explained, feeling Pioneer's satisfaction through their link. "They're offering us a chance to join a community of spacefaring races that we never knew existed. Humanity's next great leap is ready to begin, if we're brave enough to take it." Outside, the Luminars began their celebration dance again, their lights painting the stars with hope for a future that neither species could have imagined just weeks before. The Horizon's crew gathered in the main hangar bay, watching as a sleek military transport ship docked. The attempted hack had been traced back to Commander John Reed's secret research division, but instead of hiding, Reed had decided to come out into the open. "He's desperate," Captain Miller explained to Alice as they waited. "The Council stripped his funding last month when they discovered his illegal weapons research. He thinks the Luminars are his ticket back to power." Alice felt Pioneer's presence in her mind, calm but cautious. Outside the ship's hull, hundreds of Luminars had gathered, their lights dimmed to avoid detection. The transport's airlock opened with a hiss. Commander Reed stepped out, followed by 6 armed soldiers. He was tall and well-built, with cold gray eyes that reminded Alice of steel. "Dr. Ward," he said, smiling without warmth, "I've come to discuss a partnership." "There's nothing to discuss," Captain Miller replied. "You tried to steal our data. You're under arrest." Reed's smile didn't waver. "Come now, Captain. We all want the same thing, to make humanity stronger. And with the Luminar's power," he turned to Alice, "imagine what we could do with their energy manipulation abilities. We could create weapons that would make us the strongest species in the galaxy." Through their connection, Alice felt Pioneer's sadness. The Luminars had seen this before. Civilizations that chose weapons over wisdom, destruction over growth. "That's not what they're offering," Alice said firmly. "They want to help us join a peaceful coalition of species, to grow beyond." "Peace?" Reed laughed. "The universe isn't peaceful, Doctor. It's survive or die. And now we have the chance to make sure humanity survives forever." He pulled out a small device. This transmitter is linked to bombs we planted on 3 colony ships. Help us weaponize the Luminar's power, or thousands of innocent people die. The hangar went silent. Alice felt her heart pound, but through her link with Pioneer, she also felt something else, determination. "You're wrong about one thing," she said quietly. "We're not alone in this fight." Reed's device suddenly glowed blue and floated out of his hand. Outside the ship, the Luminars lit up like 1,000 stars, their combined powers surrounding the horizon in a shield of pure energy. "What you never understood," Alice continued as Reed's soldiers found their weapons wouldn't work, "is that true strength comes from cooperation, not control. The Luminars didn't just give me knowledge, they showed me their history. They learned this lesson over millions of years." Through the hangar bay windows, they could see more ships appearing. The colony ships Reed had threatened, safely teleported to their location by Luminar power. "Impossible," Reed whispered, his face pale. "No," Alice said, feeling Pioneer's gentle approval. "This is what happens when you try to understand instead of control. The Luminars could have destroyed your bombs, your ships, your weapons, but instead, they chose to protect and save. That's real power." Captain Miller stepped forward, security teams moving to arrest Reed and his soldiers. "The Council is already establishing protocols for sharing Luminar technology, but it will be done right, with safeguards, ethics panels, and respect for all forms of life." As Reed was led away, the Luminars outside began to glow brighter. Through their connection, Alice felt their message clearly. This was why they had chosen humanity. Despite those like Reed who sought power, there were more who sought understanding. More who, when faced with something new and unknown, chose curiosity over fear. The hangar bay filled with soft blue light as Pioneer and the other Luminars celebrated. They had taken a risk, touching an unknown species, and found not just allies but kindred spirits, beings who could learn from the past and work toward a better future. Now, as Alice watched Reed being taken to the brig, she knew the real work was just beginning. Humanity had passed its first test, but there would be more challenges ahead. The path to the stars had never been easy. But now, at least, they wouldn't walk it alone. 1 year after first contact, the observation deck of humanity's first Joint Species Academy looked very different from the horizon's simple viewport. Students from Earth stood side by side with representatives from 12 other species, all watching in wonder as Luminars demonstrated the principles of energy manipulation. Alice stood at the front of the room, Pioneer floating beside her in its now familiar golden glow. Through their neural link, she felt its pride in what they had accomplished together. The key to understanding cross-species communication, she explained to her class, isn't just technology. It's the willingness to reach out, even when you're afraid. She smiled at Pioneer. Sometimes, especially when you're afraid. The Academy had been built using a combination of human engineering and Luminar energy technology. Its walls could shift from solid to transparent, and its computers operated on principles that merge organic thought with pure energy. But its greatest achievement was the Neural Interface Center, where carefully chosen candidates learned to form connections like the one Alice and Pioneer had discovered. Professor Ward called out one of her students, a young engineer named Mark. "Is it true that the Luminars are teaching us how to transform like they did?" Alice nodded. "In about 10,000 years, yes. They learned the hard way that species need to evolve at their own pace. But they're showing us the first steps." She gestured to the stars visible through the transparent ceiling. "Already, our understanding of space travel has advanced centuries beyond what we thought possible." As if to demonstrate, a ship appeared out of a controlled wormhole near the Academy. It was the Horizon, now upgraded with Luminar technology, returning from its latest diplomatic mission. The ship's energy shields glowed with the same soft blue light as the Luminars, a sign of how far human technology had come. "But perhaps the most important thing they taught us," Alice continued, "was that we weren't ready for some kinds of power. Like Commander Reed, we might have used their energy manipulation abilities to make weapons. Instead, they showed us something better: how to make connections. Through the windows, they could see Earth below. The planet looked different now, its cities gleaming with clean energy that the Luminars had helped humans develop. Disease, pollution, and poverty were slowly being conquered as humanity learned to better use and share its resources. Today, Alice said, we're going to try something new. Pioneer and the other Luminars have been working on a way to let non-connected humans experience their consciousness for a few moments. Who wants to volunteer? Every hand in the room shot up, making Pioneer pulse with amusement. As Alice selected a student, Captain Miller, now Admiral Miller, entered the room. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, smiling at the eager students, "but the Council needs to speak with you, Dr. Ward. The Andromedans have made contact." Alice felt Pioneer's excitement merge with her own. The Luminars had spoken of the advanced civilization in the Andromeda galaxy, but until now, the distance had been too great for communication. "Class dismissed," she said. "Remember your reading on energy field harmonics for next time." As the students filed out, still chattering excitedly, Alice looked at Pioneer. "Ready for another adventure?" she asked, though she could already feel its eagerness through their link. The Luminar glowed brighter, its light reflecting off the Academy's walls in a pattern that Alice now recognized as laughter. Of course it was ready. Curiosity, they had both learned, was the force that truly moved the universe forward. Together, Human and Luminar headed to the Council chamber, ready to help forge another connection between species. Behind them, through the Academy's windows, Earth's sun rose over the horizon, its natural light mixing with the gentle glow of humanity's new friends among the stars. The touch that had changed everything had led not to an ending, but to an endless series of new beginnings. And that, perhaps, was the greatest evolution of all.